name is Gijs.
And his name is Saranjit.
And it's a real pleasure for both of us to represent the European Commission today. This is also one of the first official presentations of the new Open Source Program Office. In the next 15 minutes and using some 15 slides, we will give you an overview of the upcoming open source plans and actions at the European Commission. If you have any questions, please use the chat function, and we will be happy to answer those as well as we can. If we look at the agenda, this talk has just two parts. Gijs will introduce the Commission's new open source strategy, and then I will present the wider context of our open source activities. Without further ado, allow me to hand you over to Gijs.
Thank you very much, Saranjit. I assume that most of you will have seen by now the new open source strategy of the European Commission. It's been out for 3 weeks, and if you haven't already read it, then use the URL in the middle of the screen. It will take you right there. We are very happy to see it has been welcomed by many European open source companies, which is the target audience also of this conference. We've seen statements from Germany's OSPO, the Open Source Business Alliance, and in France, the CNNL, which is similar to the OSPO, a representation of open source service providers. There has been a press release from the new European Trade Association, APEL, and we're very glad to see APEL. We hope to hear a lot more from them. In the past few weeks, we've also noticed positive remarks from members of ASOP. Thank you very much for those. It would actually be really good if ASOP could join APEL, because altogether, you will then represent some 450 open source ICT companies, and most of those are SMEs. The Commission is very happy with their attention because we want to get these SMEs involved with our work on open source. We know that our commitment to open source has an effect on the EU's unique social market economy. Open source promotes competition, and it encourages SMEs, and these are Europe's innovators and entrepreneurs. We know that open source is a sort of synonym for the sharing of technological know-how. We want to make sure that it's available for all businesses, for all SMEs and all local innovators. So we kind of agree with the think tank Open Forum Europe. Our approach to open source is maturing. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, please allow me to bore you with, we've timed it, something like 2 minutes of red tape. Because the new strategy is not just another strategy. As you can see on this slide here, it's the 5th edition of our open source strategy. Previous editions were internal working documents at DIGIT, the Directorate General for Informatics. That's where we work. But the new strategy, as you see on the next slide, is different. It is not an internal working document. This is a communication to the Commission. For us, inside the organization, that makes a huge difference because it makes it a mandate given to us by the College of Commissioners. This strategy goes beyond DIGIT. This strategy goes beyond our IT community. Open source now impacts the entire Commission. So what are they telling us to do? Well, first things first. We're very pleased to make it official here now too. The Commission has an open source program office, and you're looking at it. The OSPO will become the go-between for all of the open source related activities at the Commission. We like to call the OSPO the heartbeat of our actions, the heartbeat of the planned actions. And as you see on this next slide, there's 10 of those. Allow us to focus on what we believe are 4 of these OSPO actions that will have the biggest impact. Expect sudden or big changes. The Commission is a very risk-averse bureaucracy. The change will come, and with that, Saranjit, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gijs. That was an excellent presentation of the new open source strategy. So, looking at the actions, action 1 was about internal. One of the actions that we're looking at 4 actions. Action 1 was setting up the open source program office, but the first of the 4 actions I'm going to talk about is about internal software development. First and foremost, the Commission is telling us to change the way we develop software internally. For new software projects, they want us to make the source code visible and accessible across all the teams in the Commission. This is all about breaking silos, which we've had before. The goal is to truly establish a working culture based on source principles. So what does that mean? If you go to the next slide, I'll give you an example. This is an example is about one of our projects called LEOS, Legislation Editing Open Software. This is an editor for legislative texts. LEOS is open source and used at the Commission, for example, at DG Taxud, which is working for our customs union and harmonizing taxation policies. LEOS is also used at the Council, which you know is one of the EU's 3 legislative bodies, the other 2 being the European Commission and the European Parliament. Outside the European institutions, LEOS is being used by the governments of Spain and Germany. Other countries such as Denmark, Italy, and the Netherlands are also taking an interest. Spain is helping us develop new features, and Germany is adding a team of developers. Well, actually, they're adding more developers than we have working on the software. So as you can see, this creates a software development community from just 2 member states. This is an illustration of how open source lets public services pool their resources to foster co-creation. Building public services that connect seamlessly across organization silos and borders. What we do with LEOS is now what we are mandated to do for all our software. This is very exciting. The next slide is a next action I want to talk about is making things open. Across the Commission, everybody agrees that we must make it easier to share our software. Software that is paid for with taxpayers' money. We need to share our software with other member states, companies, and citizens, and to allow our developers to contribute to relevant open source projects. And for that, the new strategy has started a process to remove a long-standing legal barrier to change the Commission household rules. I won't go into the details, but trust me that cutting red tape is not easy. However, I'm pleased to say that sometime early next year, we will have a new rule in place which will allow us to share every open source project we wish to. We have already started sharing projects, as we talked about LEOS, but here the PHP pre-configuration tools, and hope to add soon our UI software. You can expect more projects being shared over the next few years as the strategy starts to touch all other projects. Action 3 on the next slide is about innovation labs. The first 2 steps will help change our internal working culture. The next 2 steps are to involve the open source community. We will be hosting open source labs to safely try out and experiment with innovative open source solutions. We are reaching out to our colleagues, asking them for suggestions that could bring a benefit to the Commission or EU citizens. Together with the open source communities, together with European SMEs, we aim to test these tools to see if we should add them to our toolkit, either for internal or for working with colleagues in member states. So we hope Appel and others will reach out to us, for we will surely be reaching out to them. The next slide is about communities, connecting with communities. So this 4th action is the strategy is telling us that we need to reach out and connect with open source communities. Some of you may know that as part of the recent EU FOSSA 2 project, we connected with all of these communities that you see on the slide. Some large, some small, and some micro. the goal is to help the Commission become a strong force in the community of open source European public services involved in open source. Now, I want to take you take a look at the related open source projects. So the first one is about EU FOSSA 2, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. And the Commission the strategy tells us to do more and more open source projects which involve external entities. So for public services, bug bounties. Bug bounties is one of the key features of EU FOSSA 2. They're an odd duck. Financing of our projects is very tightly managed and budgets are always under pressure. And we had a unique situation here. So our procurement department asked us, what if there are no bugs and patches? Does that mean money is not spent? What? And where does it go? It's an interesting proposition for a procurement department. Gladly, I'm happy to say that we got the green light from them and the bug bounty program was on. The good news is that we ran 15 bug bounties and paid out over 200,000 euros in prizes. We also learned hackathons. We organized 3 hackathons in Brussels last year and brought together many open source projects and communities. The first one was PHP Symphony. The second one involved 6 Apache Software Foundation projects. And the third was the European Commission's internal projects. So 8 of those showcased their code and worked with attendees from all over Europe. Many key points emerged from that cooperation experience. Finally, with DG Connect, we organized a big conference bringing together open source leaders from Europe. And the observations and the discussions that took place there are worthy of continuation, which we will do in future events. Now I move on to the next slide, which is about the concept of sharing and reuse. First of all, in our data center, as Gijs mentioned, we've been using open source for nearly 2 decades. Here, open source has become the dominant force with the LAMP stack and PHP. Today, open source is used for the vast majority of the European Commission websites and many online services. There are many examples of open source tools that we share. So Eurostat shares many statistics. Our Joint Research Center makes available many of its scientific tools. The Commission also employs core contributors. For example, Drupal underpins and powers the vast majority of Commission websites. And the work we do in Drupal is contributed to the Drupal code. Similarly, with the Hive project, we contribute, and Hive is a security incident management system. Something that you may not know, which I was also surprised to learn about. About 20 years ago, we employed some of the researchers at the Joint Research Center who went on to create Apache, the world's most used web server. Wow. As you all know, open source is about co-creation. And this leads me to 2 programs, ISA² and Ceph. ISA² embodies our core desire to build interoperable solutions for public administrations, businesses, and citizens. ISA² is part of DIGIT, and that closely involves member states and big IT projects. I'm proud to say that all of the software that ISA² makes is open source. In fact, ISA² has done a huge amount of work to advance open source. And one example is through its open source observatory, which we call OSOR. The same is true for all the software coming out of the Ceph program. Ceph is Connecting Europe Facility. And this is a key EU funding instrument for growth, for jobs, for competitiveness, and it funds infrastructure across member states. This quick overview would not be complete without me mentioning the work done by our colleagues in DG Connect. They are doing an important and comprehensive study on the importance of open source software and hardware. For my next slide, allow me to share with you the work we are doing on open source at the European Public Services level. This too is an ISA squared funded initiative. And the Digit OSPO, which I'm a part of, is managing this initiative, which has 4 objectives. First is to engage, identify, secure, and sustain. In Engage, we are going to be speaking with over 30 public administrations, many of them including municipalities who often do not get the kind of exposure that we hope that they will. And this will allow us to understand their needs. The next step is to identify. We want to do a Europe-wide inventory exercise, the first ever, we believe, and we hope to find which software is common and powers Europe's public services, what is critical to the functioning of these European services. After we find the critical software, we hope to run some bug bounties and hackathons to make the software more secure. And we will build on the lessons learned from the EU FOSSA project. We hope to fix few vulnerabilities. And lastly, we are going to look at sustainability of this critical open source software. Here we are going to study the funding mechanisms that are in existence and to understand what Europe may need that's not there. We're going to look at financial and non-financial sustainability mechanisms. And hopefully by the end of the study, we will have a funding model which will not only protect the critical open source software, but also encourage innovation by new software. Thank you very much from me. I'd like to now pass you over to Gijs, who will close the session. Gijs.
Thank you, Saranjit, for pointing that out to me. Here I was thanking you for your excellent overview of open source, and you didn't hear it, but now I'm repeating it for you. The Commission wants to lead by example, and we hope to see all of our software development teams adopt the working methods that are based on the principles of open source. Because open source allows for incremental innovation in a collaborative way, the tapping of many smart minds, and that includes you. Now, the Commission President and the Council both recognize what they call strategic digital value chains. This focuses on AI, open data, blockchain, supercomputers, and microprocessors. It would not be happening without open source. It is the fundamental driver of innovation in those areas. And that is why the new open source strategy is so important. In a nutshell, the new open source strategy will make sure that the Commission becomes ever more involved in open source. And the spirit could not be better summed up in these 2 words: think open. Thank you. Let's keep in touch.